the potential for biomass or the anaerobic digestion of biomass in Orkney. So over to you, James. Adele, James is muted still.
Okay. So you can hear me okay? Good,
yes,
good.
thank you, James.
So,
yes.
Hey everyone, good evening. My name is James Juguna, and I'm based in Olvhoj University. I'm a professor there. I focus on engineering, mostly material side. And this project is probably exciting because I grew up in a farm and I'm quite keen on growing things and association animals and farming using the compost is probably one of my hobby even today on my allotment. So quite keen to pursue that area. With me is a team of very good researchers with much more better disciplines and are into the project. And I've started introducing for a start on my Gemma on my screen here.
Hi, so I started with the project in my final semester of my master's in energy management at Robert Gordon University, and I stuck with the team for the past almost a year now. I think it's been since we started, and I was in charge of mainly data collection from the start of the project.
Okay. Thanks, Gemma. And the next on my screen is Mariah.
Thanks, James. Hi, my name is Mariah. So I am a research student at the Robert Gordon University. I joined the team sometime last year as well, almost a year now, and I worked on the environmental side of the project, and I'm happy to be presenting to you guys today.
Okay, next on my screen is Adekunle.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I'm Adekunle from Aberdeen Business School. I joined the team sometimes last year as well, and I'll be assisting with questionnaire design and life cycle assessment.
Okay, great. And next on my screen is Robert.
Hi, good evening. My name is Robert Kennedy. I am the owner and operator of Strathendric Biogas. I also operate another biogas plant in the Central Belt. Both plants specialise in the treatment of agricultural wastes and distillery co-products. And at Strathendric, we have a few innovative things to do with the gas. I've got a prawn farm on site. I've got an algae business on site. I also have a biochar business on site. So it's all about diversification and best utilisation of the energy.
Okay, thanks, Robert. And next to me is Christine.
Hello. Well, my connection here is mainly linking everybody in. So I've been trying to get funding with Robert to make the next generation of Lego, and with plastic and pigment using the digestate waste. But anything we can do that's exciting along the way is good. So that's kind of my link here. And I'm from RGU, microbiologist. So.
Okay, thanks. And now on the screen with us is Abhishek from Aberdeen Business School, who also have been helping up with mainly the business technical side of it, and also the evaluation for economic analysis on guidance to support both Gemma and Robert. So that's the team. It's a huge team. Next to another person who is not here is more or less an Orkney dweller. It's Elsa. I think I saw Elsa somewhere.
Hi, yeah, I'm here as well. So I'm the Orkney Development Manager for Robert Gordon University, based at OREF in Stromness, but I've been working from home for quite a while now. And I was involved in the initial setup of the circular economy sandpit event that brought together local stakeholders to come up with this project.
Okay. Thanks, Elsa. Elsa is our star in Orkney, and she's been really helpful linking us with the different people and community, more or less for us to understand the local needs in the project. So that's a team. Martin?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. If you could just now carry on with your presentation. We're expecting a presentation of perhaps 30 to 40 minutes, and then when it's finished, we'll ask for questions, and I'll chair, making sure that we don't ask the same question 6 times and so on. You know, it's over to you, James. Whoever's going to present first.
Okay. So I'll share my screen here just a second. Okay, so everybody see the screen? I hope I can't see your face anymore, but I hope you can see the screen.
Yep. Yep.
Yes, it's there, James. No problem.
Okay, thank you, Neil. So this presentation is that feedback session we have had with the different groups because we had a lot of different interests. And this particular group in OREF is more or less around energy side, and probably the climax of our presentation after going through different groups of presentations. So I'll start on, and then I'll put in different people into different parts of the presentations as we proceed on. So as I also mentioned, the project originated from Orkney, is from a sandpit that we had there in June 2019. Following that, we decided to put together some group or team of people to put together a project, and that project was mainly to look at the AD plant, which was one of the outcome of items identified from that sandpit during that event. And since then, Robert Kydrig joined us from Southern Hendrick, and we got our RGU team, which of different skill sets, which came together, and we've been funded by OIC, but we also had help from different other partners along the way as well, including the Orkney City Council and many other groups in Orkney. So the project questions were basically three. What waste is available in Orkney? That was one of the key questions. And the other question was to look at the AD environment. And basically, is it economical? Is it environmentally sound as a solution for waste? And also the third question was, what are the options for the AD outputs? If economically is viable, what are the options would suit Orkney? Because different facilities may have different suitability or preferences that need to be abided to be able to fit the requirements that Orkney waste volumes do command. So the first part of that project was mainly to go back and look for data. The data sets which were available were in different sets, were different batches. We are not able to correlate it back together. So I'll put this to Gemma to take it from here.
That's fine. So back at, I think it was start of summer last year, we went down the data collection route. We designed an online survey, distributed it to different groups within Orkney, just to gauge what waste was available. So we've got our own data set to correlate with other data sets about. So in the online survey, we asked questions such as what waste you have available, the form of the waste that you're putting out, any fluctuations, like seasonal fluctuations in the waste, and just a few questions on the waste management systems that people have in place in Orkney. We also did some telephone interviews and just some general community correspondence. James, if you'd like to go to the next slide, we should have a data set available. So from the original survey, we came up with this data set. As I said, it was distributed through different organizations and by myself, just getting in contact with different companies and farmers in Orkney. So when we looked over the data set that we correlated, this one here, we agreed that we didn't think it was very representative of what's actually available in Orkney. So if you look specifically at the brewing and distillery waste, we noticed that was significantly lower than what we had expected. So we did go back into what I like to term as phase 2 of our data collection, but we'll come to that in a minute. So James, if you go to the next slide, it will tell us all about our types of data and the community. So we formed some clusters from our waste producers, just based on their locations and the waste produced by each one. We then did investigate into a number of locations for potential AD plant operations. One was near Kirkwall, and the other one was on the west of the mainland in an old airfield. We discussed the community opinion of AD technology. And you can see on the graph here that we had a very positive response towards the use of AD in Orkney. Almost 90% of our surveys did actually agree. So from there, we took it to phase 2. So we, James, if you'd like to go to the next slide, and we'll talk about phase 2. Oh no. So before I move on to phase 2, this is just a quick, just a quick overview of the seasonal fluctuations we did find and the different forms of waste. So as I mentioned, the fluctuations tend to be with the farming seasons due to the amount of farming waste that we correlated in our data set. And then we noticed fluctuations during the festive periods with our local producers. So then we went into phase 2. And we went back to some people we'd previously spoken to in the first data collection process, some farmers and some producers, just to get a more in-depth description of their waste that they've produced. And then we specifically contacted breweries and distilleries to try and get some more information from them. And as you can see, we came up with a significantly higher number than what we originally had in our first survey. I think that was just to do with the time of year I was conducting the survey. Everything with COVID was just new, I think. So we didn't have as much of a participation as we wanted to. But anyway, in phase 2, we came up with a pretty solid data set. We got data from every single brewery and distillery in Orkney, and that was quite important to us because working with Robert, we realised how valuable that waste would be in an AD plant. So if you look at this table here, the first half of the table is the data that we had for our final data set. And then there's like a second half. So we've got abattoir waste, fish waste, food waste, and sludge. So these few types of waste were actually pulled from different sources, some from Orkney Islands Council and then some from Zero Waste Scotland. We just wanted to include them just so we had a full rounded data set. Yeah. Okay. So James, back to you.
Yep, thank you. What we realized at the end of that process is that this waste can be broken down into various groups. But when we look down the report and we look down this data set we have got from different sources. So one of our data source is from Orkney Island City Council. The council had data which they collect over time from different stages, which was very well structured and has a lot more details of categories of groups of waste. And when you look, however, to that data set, there's a lot of other sources we could find out more information, and most of this published work, reports from Zero Waste Scotland, some magazines, some also individual reports we found, and some of the older reports. It's a group of reports. There's a lot of different data sets we could find from those sources. And what we've done then is to correlate together, because the situation, what we wanted to know is the situation before COVID and the situation that was in the past few years, just to see whether the data have shifted a lot over the time, because the project literally happened during the COVID period. And as you can see, there's groups of different waste which have gone up and down. These, for instance, the numbers we got here for the breweries is very much similar within the same group. The same thing with the dairies as well. But this varies on these groups of waste reported in reports, and compared to the one reported in by Orkney Waste, for instance, and also our own findings. And also the group from the fish waste. We don't know what happened here, whether the fishing have gone down quite a lot. We conducted the project during the COVID, so it's not a lot of fish waste was there. However, there's a lot of groups of other type of waste which are available in that in the prior to COVID, and also maybe many years before that. But it seems to have been dropping for the last 10 years. There was abattoir, we know the abattoir closed in Orkney, but there was still data set just before it closed, which was just around that figure there. But we looked down further a few years before it closed, that number was as high as that much tonnage. per year. So it gives us a bit of a feel of what the situation looks like, and therefore we can be able to project whether these numbers will grow or will remain the same in the next 10 years or so. So the next point we looked at is more or less looking at what are the key players in this sector, and perhaps looking at different types of waste and waste sources, the contaminations likely to be there, also the habitat waste inclusion as part of the waste volumes. If you have to look at the waste group, basically, if you look at the maximum waste capacity, some of these waste groups will be included as part of the risk assessment going forward from business case, but also from contamination or environmental point of view. So the next question we had here was, is AD an economical and environmentally sound solution? And I'll pass this to Robert for a start for the economical side.
Thank you, James. So what I did is I took the information from the data set, and I then applied a number of options depending on which types of feedstocks we selected and which size of a biogas plant we wanted to operate. So the first one was a waste management license regulation exempt project. So that would take feedstocks that would not enter into any part of the waste the waste management regulations. And one of the restrictions on that would be the types of feedstocks that are able and the volume of feedstocks able to be used. And I went to a model there that suggested what we would do is we would sell the heat and the power, and that would be based on selling the electricity for 15 pence per kilowatt hour and the heat for 3 pence per kilowatt hour. That came up with a 3,183 megawatt hours of electricity available to export, and almost the same volume of heat able to be exported, and that would produce an income which you can see versus the capex had a very, very long payback period. It would not be commercially viable to do a project of that size. At the bottom, you can see that the acres equivalent of fertilizer, that's how much digestate would be produced and how much land would be required for that digestate fertilizer. So what I did is I then looked at the next option would be to take that energy and instead of doing CHP, combined heat and power, actually to have a small generator to provide the energy to run the plant, and the biogas would then be converted into a transport fuel. And you can see from that the heat and power drops dramatically because obviously the gas has been converted to transport fuel. Almost 400,000 kilos of compressed natural gas equivalent could be produced. That significantly increased the income, but the payback was still quite significant at 12 years. Now we went all the way through each of these scenarios until we got to option 5, which was taking the waste management license regulation feedstocks and actually applying the full volume of feedstocks available, because one of the restrictions on the feedstocks is a maximum 100 tons per day can be treated in a paragraph 51 exempt biogas plant. So if you take those feedstocks and actually apply the full volumes available, then that's the amount of electricity and compressed gas that could be produced, and that would give a circa 6-year payback on the capital investment. And you can see that the amount of digestate produced would require about 1,200 acres of land for fertilizer. James, I'll pass back to you if you wish.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Robert. And the next part of the project was looking at the environmental impact assessment. And I'll pass this to Maria, please.
Thank you, James. So for the environmental impact, I created this diagram to demonstrate what the AD process would look like. So it begins from the food waste collection and storage and handling and treatment if required, depending on the various feedstock. And then the feedstock going to the AD, and then biogas and digesters being produced as the output. So what was included in this investigation is the collection and transportation of the feedstock and materials to the AD facility, which we are currently using a model somewhere located near Kirkwell, and also the AD process itself and the emissions from AD. So this does not include the construction of the AD or CHP plant, the conversion, or the post-treatment of the digesters just now. Can I move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So I performed an investigation to compare the environmental impact of the AD versus the current practice of waste disposal. So this is using the maximum waste case scenario. So based on the maximum data we collected, and currently about 60% of the waste in Orkney region is being disposed into landfill, 25% which is used for animal feed, and about 15% used on land farm. So using this various ratios, I performed a comparison of running this waste through an AD versus these various waste disposal methods. And as you can see from the chart, they all have their individual colors representing what the waste and what the impact would look like. And the AD, which is the yellow, came up having the highest, but that is because all the waste goes through that process versus the various waste going into the divided across the three various methods, which is the land farm, animal feed, and landfill. Anyway, however, this has the other processes come up to have a long-term environmental impact, especially the land farm. And that is one of the limitations of running this through the software, as the software cannot account for the long-term impact of this process. However, various studies have showed that landfill disposal of waste could have up to 100 years of impact, but that cannot be studied over the course of this period. However, one of the advantages as well of using the AD, which was studied from various literature, is the fact that the waste produced from the AD has a better impact for land farm and for animal feed. So the quality of the digestives produced from that has a better impact in the long term for the animal feed and the land farm. So that is the summary of the environmental analysis performed so far. I will now hand over to James for the next discussion points.
So the key components there to look at is both the waste minimization and capital generation, and also the operation costs. And the other point perhaps to look at is the method for minimizing the environmental impact. Obviously, the AD has benefit, but that benefit is seen to be environmental, is there in long term rather than in the immediate short term. But it also depends on how the system is configured and the exploitation, whether it's going to the farms and what kind of crops grown in the period of time. So the bad question which we're looking at is what are the options of the AD output? And here we got a few options, which covers the greenhouse, CNG trucks, connection with the breweries. For instance, in this case, we cited the Highland Park, the industrials and buses. So the greenhouse benefit, where do I start here? Maybe, Robert, do you want to start on that, please?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, at the moment, there's very few incentives from the governments for the generation of renewable energy. The feed-in tariff is currently gone, and there's not much hope for the renewable heat incentive at the moment. So the only real incentives just now are either to produce a transport fuel and receive income from the renewable transport fuel obligations, or to find uses for that energy, either to sell it direct to end users or to turn that energy and those resources into better value. Now, a greenhouse would be an absolute ideal scenario for an anaerobic digestion plant. Anaerobic digestion produces biogas, which is between 50 and 60% methane, but could be up to 40 to 50% carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide could be used to enhance plant growth within a greenhouse. The biogas is converted into heat and power. Both heat and power could be ideal for a greenhouse to enhance production. And finally, at the back end, we have the digestate from the end process of the biogas production, and that is a very high value fertilizer. So a typical greenhouse, a 1 acre greenhouse, would require an installed thermal capacity of 500 kilowatt thermal, and could grow up to about 200 tons per year of tomatoes. I'm not the expert when it comes to the economics of greenhouse growing, but I do know that greenhouses and anaerobic digestion plants are a good partnership.
Thanks. Keep on the CNG as well.
Yep, sure. So Strathendra Biogas conducted a study into renewable transport fuels for its own biogas plant. I have a high level of HGV trucks coming in and going out of the sites all the time. So I have done a study looking at the Iveco Stralis 6x2 HGV truck and the converting of the biogas into transport fuel. That would be probably the most financially viable option. I think on the slides I have a vehicle, if I'm correct, vehicle equivalent trucks. Not in that one, sorry, I do apologize. If I go into my actual economic models just now for transport, CNG. So typical, you could have on the number 5, which I'm just, please bear with me a second. We could have 12 trucks running on CNG, each of them doing 160,000 kilometers per year. So that's the potential of the gas production from the biogas plant. As I say, there's not many incentives now other than for transport fuel. So the other option is to sell the energy direct. And in my research, I've looked at dozens of distilleries. In my research, the co-products, as I like to call them, the co-products from distilleries, if they're converted into biogas, could provide between 50 and 75% of the energy required of a distillery. So the energy requirements of Highland Park could easily be met by all of the feedstocks that are available on Orkney. So it could be a very good opportunity to sell energy direct to an on-island business.
Okay, Robert, I'll keep on you as well. I think maybe you can help us with the connection with the breweries. That's your speciality.
Yes, obviously, that's what I specialise on. 95% of the feedstocks that I use in both of my biogas plants are distillery and brewery co-products, and it's a fantastic feedstock. It's much better than energy crops. Certainly, it's better to use co-products than energy crops direct. One of the things, as I touched on in my introduction, is that I'm looking at a number of opportunities for the renewable energy from the biogas plant. And we have on site a warm saltwater prawn farm, which takes the heat and power from the biogas plant, and I take the waste from the prawn farm back into the biogas plant. It's a nice symbiosis. I also have an algae business on site, which is producing an animal feed from distillery co-products. I also have a carbon business that's using the energy from the biogas plant to process through pyrolysis the waste cardboard and turn it into a biochar. There's also the dairy farm that's on site, which I take slurry and manure and some silage from, and I send them back renewable energy, heat, power, and also the back end of the process. I dry the digestate fibre to produce an animal bedding. So there's a number of opportunities that I'm already using at Strathendrick, and it just needs a bit of lateral thought to ensure that the energy produced by a biogas plant is best utilised locally.
Okay. Thanks very much. That's mainly very good points across the board, covering the 4 key areas there: greenhouse, CNG trucks, breweries connection, and industrial symbiosis. And so the questions that we basically were covering here is what was available, the volumes, the frequency, the AD economics, and environmental pathway, which was looked into, and we're also looking at the solutions available. So in conclusions, what we're saying that the key findings of the work is that there's high interest, obviously, in the community to look into the places where we could install the AD reactors. So there's 3 locations which we are preferred or offered as potential locations, and also there's interest by community to have these systems installed in those places. So that's a good positive point in terms of location and availability and support, community support to install an AD system. The other part of that is the economical benefits. There's obviously very clear economical benefits, a clear cut. There's a business case to be made where, for instance, there's power generation, depending on the option selected. You could have a brewery linked, or distillery brewery linked to an AD plant or a farm. You could have high value jobs created. There's green biofertilizers which could be produced. Probably if you're looking for the option 5, which is the full licensed plant, you're looking probably at about 1,200 acreage of bio fertilizers, and there's a long-term environmental benefit compared to the solutions available today in the long term as the project evolve. The best 2 options noted for the 2 plants here, they are in a low feed solution, and we also got a high feed solution. The low feed solution is WRIR. This is exempt license feedstock, which produce about 930 megawatt hours per year, and that gives heat, power, and transport fuel options. And the capex is around £3.1 million, and the margin per year is around 265,000 £265,000 a year, and that gives a return rate for about 12 years' time. The high feed volume, which is a full licensed plant, will produce about 3,270 megawatt hour a year, and that gives you the power option, and also gives you about 470 tons of CNG per year. That also produces about 740,000 pounds margin per year, and that plant will give a return rate in 6 years' time. So there is definitely financially driven or economically driven rationale or why an AD would be a suitable option for waste, particularly on energy solution, either as a fuel, power, or heat. So the key findings are related to farming fertilizers here, specifically is the biofertilizers. There's energy produced could also be used, for instance, in greenhouse, and you could probably reuse carbon, not only energy, but also carbon dioxide, the heat being produced from that. Source could be reused directly. You could probably also use the heatings from the bio plant, from the AD plant to feed or grow the plant, or feeding the or growing supporting the greenhouse energy provision in a given window, particularly in the winter periods. These environmental factors which considered, we still trying to understand the long-term and the short-term implications, but the long-term implications are that there is a positive green environmental benefit for going with the AD system as a waste solution. Christine, did I miss anything you could add?
I'm just reading the chat and thinking, actually, one of the ways forward is to actually go for funding from the Scottish government to progress this. This is, there's the evidence here on the feedstocks and the value, however you choose to use stuff. But I think there is the opportunity to actually go for Scottish government funding to get something in place, and that probably needs a champion on the island, but we do have contacts who've been involved in the projects who got Scottish government funding to do this on the mainland. So if there's a will, then we can pursue funding to get something in place, but it will need some kind of champion to be managing it. That's the challenge.
Good. Thanks so much. Robert, anything you can add on top?
Again, I was looking through some of the chats. So I'm sure we'll get to the Q&As at the end. But yeah, the cost of selling the energy to an end user does require a high price to pay, and that sort of pushes towards not selling electricity direct to an end user, and perhaps using the energy internally in a greenhouse or something of that ilk, or to turn it into a transport fuel. Again, some of the questions about the feedstocks availability and seasonality, again, we'll address them in the chat, but in the Q&A. But I do think that there's the foundations of a good project on Orkney. I do think there's plenty of feedstocks, and perhaps it will be a bit of a field of dreams once the biogas plant is realised. A lot more available feedstocks could come to the surface.
Okay. Thanks, Robert. So just to sum up, I think the key questions or the key discussion points perhaps to proceed from where we are at this stage is perhaps looking at the risk to market, maybe what's a benefit to that, the risk to energy price changes Robert have just mentioned there. There's also involvement of the council and other local community drives. Also, the policy change may also impact the work in the future. But obviously, on the top level there is more as a community facility, and we would need to have that buy-in and keep it to keep it more long-term solution. You would have a community buy-in, whichever way we go with, whether it's a private investment or in a public investment, or joint both of those. And I think that's more or less what we have at this stage. And these are the 3 locations which we were offered. Gemma, you want to run through this, please?
Yeah, sure, that's fine. So just from emails and through the survey process at the start of the project, a few members reached out to me with potential options for locations. So The top one is the one on the west of the mainland, and that's with an old airfield. This has like areas of old hard standing, so it could be a potential location. And then there was also 2 options near Kirkwall. I think we ruled out one for a reason I can't remember right now, but we ended up sticking with the Hoorie Farm as our second option. This seemed like a good choice as it was close to Kirkwall, and it was quite central in terms of where our main waste producers were. So yeah, those were our 2 locations we had in the end.
Okay, thanks very much again. That's the end of our presentation. Thanks very much for the presenters and speakers, and also thanks to many supporters from the Farming Association, from EMEC, SAC Consorting, Highland and Island Group, Orkney Island Councils, and also from OIC. We had Jenny Hugger, who have been very, very helpful for this project. In fact, we couldn't have done without Jenny for many reasons. So many thanks to all those and acknowledgement for their contribution in this project. So that's it for me. Martin, over to you, please.
Hello, yes, thanks for that, James. Very, very well done. You're right in the middle of the target time for finishing. So top marks for that, because not everybody manages. I've been asked to just confirm that we are recording this and the presentation will be available on the OREF website. The one thing I'm not sure about is exactly what format that is. Is it a YouTube video or is it some other thing? But it'll definitely be available on the website. So we've had some very interesting questions, and I've been half missing the talk, to be quite honest, trying to keep up with all the questions that have been asked. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I've 6 people, I think, asking questions, one who was asked multiple. But the first one, I was asked to ask the question on the person's behalf. So it's Janine that asked the question, and it's really 2 questions. The fertilizer in waste, so the waste products, do they have high nitrogen and phosphate and so on contents? And the second element to the same question really is, are herbicides and pesticides carried through from the wastes that are processed into the end products?
Okay. I'll pass that to Robert. I think this specialist running one already.
Yeah, thank you very much. So the first thing to point out is the anaerobic digestion process merely recovers the energy potential, or the majority of the energy potential, from the feedstocks. It doesn't necessarily remove any of the nutrients, the N, P and Ks. So any nutrients that go into the biogas plant generally come through the process and come out the other end. They generally come out in a slightly better form. If I give an example of slurry, slurry when it spreads directly on fields, about 30% of it evaporates to the atmosphere, 30% ends up in the water courses, and only about 30% actually goes into the ground and does any benefit for the fertilizer. And that's because nature has to convert that back into ammonium nitrogen, and that takes time. So the anaerobic digestion process breaks that down and makes the nitrogen more readily available. So again, slightly anecdotal, but the farm at Strathendrick, prior to the biogas plant, would perhaps do 3 cuts per year. The first year that we applied fertilizer to the land, we got almost 5 cuts of silage. Such is the benefit of digestate over agricultural slurry. So in terms of NPK, it carries through. The herbicides and fungicides, if there are herbicides and fungicides and pesticides within the agricultural waste, they perhaps could pass through unless the process was pasteurized to see if that would remove them. But generally, these things would have a detrimental effect on the biogas plant. And in my experience, I've not seen any detrimental effect by using agricultural wastes, especially if they're just silage, manure, and slurry. So hopefully that answers that question.
Okay, thank you for that, Robert. Janine asked me to ask the question, so if Janine's got a follow-on question, perhaps she could put it on the messages and I'll ask it later. But next I'm going to ask Neil Kermode to ask one only of his questions.
Well, that's not really fair, Martin. God, I don't know.
No, you'll get a second chance.
Oh, that's all right. Fair enough. No, I was just trying to make sure there were some questions for the panel. There's nothing worse than that horrible sort of a hole that opens up at the end or something. Yeah. So I was just wondering a bit of logistic stuff, really. I've got rather tasteless discussion, but I've got no feel for how much poo comes out of a cow. So, and how much of a tanker full would you have, and therefore how many cows waste would you get in a tanker to get to somewhere? So I'm just trying to get a feel for the logistics of carting stuff across the county to get it to a digester.
Okay.
And then the calorific value versus the fuel cost of what you just spent and carting it across the island. And I just didn't know if there are any sort of rules of thumb.
Robert,
if you want, James, I'll take this one as well. In general, cattle slurry has the similar energy content to pot ale, which is the waste product from a distillery. Very similar, about 150 kilowatt hours per fresh ton. To get into great detail, an average cow will produce about 55 litres of slurry per day. So I believe if a cow is housed all year round, they'll produce 20 tons of slurry. And in general, if they're out in the summer, 6 months, it's generally 10 tons per year per cow. So yeah, a 44-ton HGV tanker load of slurry or pot ale will contain about 4 megawatt hours of gas energy.
That's good. Yeah, it's good to know. Thanks. Just interesting for that.
There is a rule of thumb about distance, and obviously you have to do that equation. What makes commercial sense?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Robert, and thank you for that question, Neil. We'll go to James, and James is going to ask a question himself, if that's okay. James Ferguson.
Yeah, well, perhaps to make things even worse, is there any potential for using wastewater from households? So from Kirkwall, if the AD plant could be sited near a town, is there potential for processing that waste as well?
I don't know, Robert, do you think so? I'm not quite sure, but
I can answer that. Absolutely, an anaerobic digestion plant will treat anything high in fat, protein, or carbohydrates. So the simple answer from a biological process is yes. One has to consider, though, any cleaning products that are put down the drain with the household waste, if it has any inhibitors in it. So you have to be careful of what you feed into a digester. But in general, yes, you can. You could feed anything high in fat, protein, carbohydrates. It then becomes a regulatory process. So you'd have to comply with the SEPA's regulations on waste management.
I think to add on, the AD systems are quite popular for sludge digestion or processing. So I think the question is only about the chemicals that come through the process. If for dishwashers and other stuff like that would made higher impact the bio stuff in the AD system.
Yeah, the biogas process is especially the methanogenesis is very susceptible to inhibition. For example, at the dairy farm where we take cattle slurry, we had to introduce separate footwells for the cleaning of the cows, the hooves. A formaldehyde solution is used for the sterilization of the hooves. That formaldehyde used to get poured down into the slurry, which could inhibit methane production. So at the dairy farm, we have separated out the chemicals to prevent biogas inhibition.
Okay, James, have you any follow-on question from that, or are you happy with the answers?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the next one is Rosemary, who's going to ask her own question.
Hi, really interesting discussion. I'm basically a food writer and have been involved in all sorts of food education throughout my career, and worked a lot with agriculture with one of the big, with Waitrose, one of the big supermarkets. So we moved here from Sussex, and I was right in the middle of anaerobic digester countryside to a certain extent. I know what it's like to be quite close to an AD plant when it's belching. And so that, I think, is something to be considered in terms of siting the plant. It seems that Twat Airfield would be a great site, but there is then the issue of carting everything up there. But it's just something that would have to be considered with regard to Hatston as a site and the existing food processing businesses that are there, if these particles were airborne in any way. But I'm very excited that this discussion has come up, because I think it is such a way to pave a path for Orkney to be more self-sufficient, if you like, in terms of food production. And I could be a lone voice in this, but food and getting it to our homes is 25% of our carbon footprint, and probably higher here in Orkney. So if we could produce the more greenhouse crops and the crops that need protection, we're never going to stop people now wanting tomatoes, courgettes, aubergines, etc., all the year round. So if you factor in the true environmental costs of bringing those here and the state in which those products arrive in for consumers to purchase, I think, glass houses are the way forward. But I guess the big question is, what would really be best for Orkney in the next 10 or 20 years? As we seek to bring net zero forward, what would make the greatest difference to the way in which we live? And the whole issue about food production is so pertinent to this. And I think I owe an apology to Gemma, because I think I was contacted to fill in a questionnaire last year, which I never got to. And when I did contact her and found it again, it was too late. So Gemma, if that was you, I apologize profusely. So there.
Okay, thanks, Rosemary.
Excellent.
What's the answers?
I can jump in here briefly. Thank you for the apology. It was quite tough in the end, actually, to get the survey picking up. I think it was just a wrong time of year for me to be doing it anyway. However, we as a group will 110% agree with you that we only want to find out what is best for Orkney and what Orkney as a community would prefer from the AD outputs. We don't want to suggest something that isn't supported by the community. They originally started as a community-driven AD plant project. So I think it is important that we as a team and the future in the project do maintain contact with the community and open discussions about the future of what Orkney actually wants from the project itself. So I think you made a very good point there, that we do want to ensure that we are providing what is best for Orkney.
I think in my experience, talking about food and food production is viewed as such a comfortable middle class thing. It's really difficult to get everybody to come on board as stakeholders. And I think Orkney is it's got such potential, But, you know, obviously you guys are aware of the fact that not so very much of our food is produced here. You're probably also very aware of the fact that the food we do produce brilliantly, like beef and lamb, has got to change. You know, I think, and the greatest changes in that are going to be beef production. And it's a really difficult subject to bring that up with farmers. And I think that, you know, there's going to need to be such an interesting conversation about this with the farmers up here. Because, well, you'll know more about coming legislation than me, but a lot of the smaller family farms up here simply won't be viable for beef production anymore. And so to offer them a way out, you know, to keep their farms and possibly grow willow or something like that for the ADs. And heaven knows if there's one thing that grows more than 12 inches above the ground, sorry, I'm showing my age by talking inches, but if there's one thing that grows taller than that here, it's willow. And, you know, what could we be doing with that that would be useful for ADs? So, you know, there's all sorts of questions, but wow, what an exciting conversation.
Okay, thanks for that, Rosemary. Can I just ask James to decide if somebody needs to answer that last point about the willows, please?
I think Robert have a comment, and I think there's a positive feedback there, Robert.
Yeah, Rosemary, one of the unfortunate things, whilst anaerobic digestion is good at fats, protein, and carbohydrates, they don't have teeth. So things that are high in lignin cellulose, it's difficult for them to break down without some serious mechanical treatment. So if I could say anything, I would say that farmers, if they had surplus energy crops, and in particular grass seems to be quite an easy crop to manage, I would suggest that diversification to an energy crop would be a better solution than perhaps willow.
Okay.
I would also say that in general for the UK, energy consumption is 55% of our UK energy consumption is heat, 27% is transport, and 18% is electricity. So the generation of electricity is perhaps the lowest common denominator, and the easiest to solve in terms of their UK energy production. I do think that transport and heat are the next ones that we should be focused on. But you're right, Rosemary, food production, if we can decarbonise that, we can't change people in terms of what food they like to eat. We can maybe reduce our heat, we can reduce our transport, and we get lots of renewable electricity in Orkney. So perhaps food production is the one to focus on.
Mm.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to draw an end to that thread, and I've got a feedback from Janine. So she was asking the question about the passing through a fertiliser, and she's made a statement. NPK are the inorganic chemical form which destroys the microbial community in the soil, so it will give initial benefit. I presume that means if it's not passed through. But soil impactation will occur over time, which is why European farmers are following carbon sequestration methods to provide natural NPK available in the soil through enhancing microbial and mycorrhizal life in the top metre of soil. And apologies because she split that into two messages, so I had to jump between the two. So that was just a quick bit of feedback from Janine. I'd like to ask Neil to ask his next question, please. Not being forgotten, Neil.
There you go. I can't remember what the next question was. Well, I think it's about seasonality, really. That was a piece that I was interested about. Did you get any data on the seasonality? Because obviously the occupation patterns with the cattle here are they're indoors for about 6 to 7 months or so. And it strikes me that they probably, I believe the slurry is then stored for nearly all the year, because it certainly hums out here in the countryside when it then gets sprayed around in the early spring. So would a plant work better if it had a uniform feed or is there something about it's better to run in the summer or better to run in the winter? And I just wonder if there's anything that drives the economics there at all.
It's a balance, Neil, between storage capabilities and seasonality. For instance, Strathendric biogas in the summer has a higher propensity to using distiller's draft, and the reason being is that all the animals are out in the fields eating grass, so the demand for draft from an agricultural perspective drops. So distilleries almost give that away. And then when you flip into the winter, the cows are back indoors, the draft price goes up, and then I switch to energy crops. So we do an element of switching depending on the seasonality. But yeah, it's just storage. If you could store an entire year's worth and have a homogeneous feedstock, your biogas plant would be most happy. But that's not how life works. So you just have to deal with the cards you're given.
Thanks for that, Robert. But it sounds as though the interaction of those two does work well together. So the Brose draft and the slurry being out of phase with each other, or 180 degrees out of phase. Yeah, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, it doesn't affect the biogas plant, other than you can't switch immediately from one to the other. So you have to integrate them over a number of weeks so that the biology doesn't get a shock.
Okay, thank you. For the next question, I'd like to go to Jonathan Walters. Jonathan, you need to unmute and put your screen on if you don't mind.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
You can,
Yeah,
okay, sorry.
We can see the top half of your head as well, but...
Yes, I've been cast out to a tablet because my laptop wasn't working this evening and I've never used Zoom before, so apologies. My question was essentially, sorry, I'm from Orkney Islands Council and I'm currently involved in an integrated waste facility development project, going down the route that we're sending our waste to Shetland still with more treatment. And we've unfortunately been forced down a route of looking at the potentiality of an in-vessel composting scheme. So my questions sort of derived from there in terms of the 2012 joint effort from Zero Waste Scotland trying to join up potential partners for an AD plant. And I suppose an awareness that some of the people involved in the food industry up here, I suppose there's a challenge in terms of expanding their production because of the issue on a restrictive land bank up here. So perhaps, there's opportunity that they would be willing for an AD plant to enable that expansion of their current production. But for a lot of the other ones and various feedstocks, there are exemption routes for disposal. And the challenge, my question is basically the challenge is to provide a route via AD that can compete against those current disposal routes. So it's to make the AD option an attractive route for them so that you can receive their outputs. And I wondered if this had been looked at in any way as part of this study.
I think we have looked at some part of that, but I'll probably just first through Gemma. Do you want to say anything on that? And then maybe Robert, and then I'll add on.
I think the perspective I got from waste producers was that they were willing to be involved in the AD process. I think the producers that do have current exemption routes have realised that providing it to an AD plant can produce benefits, and I think that's the impression I got from waste producers, that they were willing to be involved because of the benefits that would come out of an AD plant.
Okay, thank you.
Emma, Robert, do you want a quick comment?
Yeah, obviously there are feedstocks. Strathendric and Tambowie have the same situation where some feedstocks arrive here with a gate fee. Some arrive here you have to pay for. There's a limit to what a biogas plant can pay for feedstocks, but in general we can compete with most industries for them. If an industry has an advantage such as a long sea outfall for liquid waste, then there's not much a biogas plant can do to compete against that, other than for them to consider maybe their corporate social responsibility and convert that into renewable energy, so long as it didn't cost them any more money. I would certainly say that that's the route that we should encourage all waste producers to do. The other options, I suppose, in terms of long sea outfalls and various other means of disposal that are currently available, the SEPA and the government are looking at tightening all of these options all the time. And when anaerobic digestion becomes what we'd call best available technology, then there's a higher pressure on industries to look at more responsible disposal of their wastes.
Yeah, I think I was just about to comment on that final comment, final part of the law, but that the regulations are constantly changing. If you look back in 20 years' time and where we are today, the waste volumes where you could throw them and things you could put in landfill have shifted, and so things you can throw to the sea, which also shift us at the same time. So within given time, there's also the need to look for, could we make more out of this waste rather than just being a waste? And that's probably in addition to the public social responsibility, there is an added, not just economical value, but also a sense of sustainability that could be brought into question there. So we looked into it, and when you put this question into place, the first question you would probably have, and probably Gemma had to do a lot of this explanation, is what's an AD? What does it do for me? And could this be useful to that? And we have to go back to several companies to explain them. Actually, this waste is possible. This waste is possible. This waste is not possible. But if we do have this waste in this form, then this will become acceptable. And as they look more into it, they buy into it. And so I would think going forward, there is an interest, there's potential route for exploitation. There's a business case. They probably could benefit, this company could benefit directly from it as well. And if you combine these together as a package, there's a win-win situation.
Yeah, thanks for those answers. Next off, I'm going to ask a question on someone's behalf who's asked me to ask the question. I'm going to ask the question in two different ways that slightly different to what he asked them. The first thing easy to answer is, do any current anaerobic digesters utilize the waste products from scallop, crab and lobster processing?
Never say never. I would imagine that answer is yes. I was approached by a scallop farmer on the west coast of Scotland if I would consider taking his waste into the anaerobic digestion plant. But given that he was about 60 miles away from me, and the volumes that he had were not significant, it didn't make commercial sense to do it. But had there been an anaerobic digestion plant near to him, then perhaps, yes, that would have happened. Okay, thanks for that. And the second one, I'm asking this because I might have missed something. The question is biochar used as a fertilizer? But what I wasn't quite clear is where does biochar fit in with anaerobic digestion? So that's a study that I'm doing at the moment with a company called Carbogenics. And what we're doing is we're looking at how biochar can enhance the production of biogas. One of the issues with anaerobic digestion is its tolerance to changes in environment, and high ammonia can actually inhibit methane production. So what we've been doing is we've been using a biochar as an additive to the AD process, and it provides a biofilm for the microbes, but it also absorbs ammonia and prevents inhibition of methane. So I've managed to prove, at the moment, between 10 and 20% higher gas yields using the feedstocks that I'm using by introducing a biochar into the digester. We haven't done the study yet, but one would imagine the digestate that comes out the back end will obviously have the biochar in it, and biochar is a slow releasing, if it's absorbed the nitrogen, it will slowly release it back into the environment and perhaps give a more controlled nitrogen release. But that study hasn't been done yet, Martin.
Right, that's very interesting though, because I did quite kind of wonder what biochar had to do with it, but you're not using it as a fertilizer directly, you're using it as to absorb excess nitrogen from the ammonia.
Correct.
Yeah, that's very interesting, thank you. I'm going to go back to Neil because I believe he has got a third question.
Oh, blimey, I can't remember what the third one was I asked now.
Well, I'll jump to somebody else if you want.
It was a bit about the foods, the different crops. I know you mentioned tomatoes, so it's producing a certain amount of tomatoes. And I did wonder whether you looked at vertical farming at all, because and whether there were crops which might have a better yield, or sorry, a better value, because we're looking. There's certainly some ideas around about looking at vertical farming more. And I just wondered if you'd had any figures which use as a benchmark and whether they needed revising now that there are other indoor growing techniques other than just tomatoes and stuff.
I can answer that if you wish. Yes, I've looked at all sorts of agricultural and farming, horticultural processes. Vertical farming is one. Obviously, the Hutton Institute have got their facility. There are a number of organisations that do vertical farming. They escape me at the moment, but most of them are small herbs. That's the sort of product that they make. And I'm engaged with a small company looking to install a small vertical farm at the biogas plant. I would also say it's slightly curveball, but I am engaged with a Colorado-based company who do hydroponic hops growing, and for the brewing industry, and that's something that could produce a very high value product, is hydroponically grown hops.
Thank you for that. So I've got a question from Robert, but I'm going to let Robert ask the question, but I'm not sure that we should expect the team from Robert Gordon's to answer it. But if Robert Leslie would like to step up and ask his question. You there, Robert?
Sorry, yeah, I was just finding me unmute. Yeah, no, I just wondered if the potential food production for this project would help address the cost of the produce, and therefore, make any inroads into the need for a food bank in Orkney. I guess we need wider solutions for that, but I'm just hoping at some point that we can be a bit more self-sustaining and able to feed everybody in Orkney with what we're producing here.
So I don't know, James, do you think any of your team are able to answer that? Or?
I was thinking throwing that question.
Well, yeah, I think there are potential opportunities, and there are a lot of funding opportunities that may lead to the next steps here. And the idea I had, and I'm a microbiologist and really more interested in algae and toxins and shellfish and that sort of thing, but I did do my PhD on peanuts in London, so I've got a bit of crop growing sort of mentality in there. But I think one of the ideas we had was to work with the community to actually see what would be good, what would you guys want that you could have locally and be sustainable with, that would actually engage everybody, be available to everybody, that so everybody has there's these pie charts of what people eat and what people should eat for a healthy diet, and that's part of a lot of the UK funding programs, and I can see great opportunities there. It's just unfortunate that the deadline was last week or something, or the week before, and really to actually mobilize the best funding applications with a whole consortium of you know, academics, but more importantly, the public, councils, industry really makes a difference to make that change. And I think, although that one's gone, there are many more opportunities. And I think we've got the expertise around, and with James Hutton and their crops and stuff, and also using the digestate as a fertilizer, which is a wonderful stable fertilizer compared to putting cow poo on the fields or potato on the fields, which people do all the time. And also we do have a lot of sustainable resources and other things. I'm just writing a paper at the minute that's taking me a bit of time, but like, for example, when you look at the potato that comes out, there's lots of other exciting things in there, like lactic acid. Lactic acid is a, you know, an amazing platform chemical that will change the way we do things away from petroleum-based stuff, and that the, you know, the need for this is growing, and people produce it by fermentation largely because you get a better product than if you do it by chemistry. But a lot of the potato has got this stuff sitting in there and doing nothing, and we do nothing about it. But it's only because we've done a study that's like found it there, where we thought it would be something else as a major. So we've got multiple things that we need to, and the more information we have, we can decide what's going to be the best solution for local economy. So for example, in Islay, you've got 8 distilleries, I think, in Islay. Most of the potato goes out to sea, but you've got protein, you've got lactic acid, you've got phosphate, a bit of nitrate, you know, lots of really good stuff that can be reused and you know, make us much more sustainable. I mean, where does our protein come from? Where does our phosphate come from? I mean, okay, there may be 300 or 400 years more of phosphate rock left on the planet, mainly in Morocco, but you know, and that maybe we'll all be snuffed it by then. But the fact is, we have to look at the bigger picture and reuse what we've got. So there is this stuff there, and we need to pay more attention to it and have a multi-product strand. So the anaerobic digester contributes to that, and anything else. And it may be you can take protein out of the potato before the rest of it goes in the digester, because, and that doesn't make any difference because people in Heriot Watt have studied this. So you can get protein that's good for animal feed out and of the potato, the rest goes to digester, you still get the same methane production. So, you know, we really need to be smart. Sorry, I'm waffling on, it's a bit late for me. I'm normally out with the dog at 6 and it's nearly my bedtime, so I apologize if I'm rambling. But
Christine,
really,
I think you answered the question and then told us quite a few other bits and pieces as well. So thank you for your answer.
Sorry.
It's okay. Someone's made a comment which is relevant to what Robert was asking about, and maybe we could have a community farm system to help reduce food poverty and increase good nutrition. So that's not really anything for your team from Robert Gordon's to think about, but it's something for people in Orkney to think about. Now, I have a whole dose of questions. Most of them I would like to ask Robert, and we haven't got time, but I can put it into one simple question. Can we visit Strathdarick to see the symbiotic systems? Is it possible for us to make arrangements to come and see how it works and ask you further questions?
It's an open invitation. I bring university students to the site all the time, COVID aside. Yeah, I welcome a number of visitors, students alike, to come to the site and learn about how to do anaerobic digestion, but how to diversify out of just generating electricity.
That's great. Thank you, Robert. So I've got Robert's email address. So if anybody's interested, if they get in touch with me, and I can get them put into touch with Robert. So I'd like to go back to James now for one last question, really, and say, what are the next stages of the project?
Right. The next stages of the project is more or less looking for funding and also the engagement with more stakeholders. So the stakeholders meaning people who are willing to invest in the next phase of the project. The next phase of the project meaning how do we put the plan in place? And that may mean looking for funding from different sources, from either Scottish government, UK government, European research councils as well. We already have a small consortium looking onto vertical growing, which somebody asked about earlier, and that joining with with another 2 organizations perhaps who are specialists in growing crops. And also we have other groups which may be interested in, for instance, energy management, and bring that group together along with the farmers perhaps to bring a group for seeking the funding for the next phase. It's very, we need to sell this project fast, weigh the reaction coming from the people, yourselves as a community, and then use that as a drive to go forward. But we're already working on trying to find funding and more or less involving the community in Orkney to be part and parcel of that next stage process. The other bit probably we would encourage, and probably we need to look at, is also the evaluation of social impact as well, because there's a business case on one side, but that's a side. There's also social impact. What's the reaction around the new plant, the community support, the network you bring to the community, because in the long term, perhaps the social impact is what will sustain it more than economical impact, which will be part of the drive to it. So in addition to other studies we would like to do, social impact is part of it, but the key drive is to look for funding for the next stage. If you know a very good investor, we are welcome.
Okay, thank you for that, James. So several people have commented, and I'm not going to read their names out, saying it's been a really interesting talk, and thank you very much. So I'm going to wrap up early, because it's better that than cutting short or overrunning. Say thank you very much, James, and thank you to all your team for your presentations. Thank you for the audience members' questions. I hope that those questions have in some respects enabled James and team to get some further information. Quick reminder that if you want to catch up on it, we will be presenting the presentation will be available online. If you're not an Orkney Renewable Energy Forum member and not a presenter, it'd be great if you could put the £3 in as a contribution. And I think we're going to try and find a better way of doing it in the future. We agreed for today we'd just mention it. Thank you very much, everybody.